Hi there, this is Dennis Velco with OutBüro. You're listening to OutBüro Voices, where we have engaging conversations with LGBTQ professionals, entrepreneurs, and community leaders from around the world. And today I am absolutely thrilled to be speaking with Ashley Brundage. She is a diversity and inclusion champion and announcing the release of her new book today, Empowering Differences. Welcome to the show, Ashley.
Oh my goodness, I'm so excited to be here and be out about it.
Well, wonderful. I know we will dive all into that here in just a moment. And what an exciting day. Today is December 18th, 2020, for those listening at this at some point in the future. And today you're doing your book launch later this evening. How exciting.
But it is so exciting.
Well, let's take just a few moments. I always like to kind of start off with a little bit of history and background, and then we'll build up into the hows and the whys and so forth of your new book. So could you start out by maybe giving us a little bit of, your professional journey and a little bit maybe too of your life journey as well?
You got it. So I came into this whole world of diversity and inclusion kind of by accident. Accidental activist is, I think, something that happens to some of us in the community. I was facing the economic crisis in 2008, and I lost my house and was out without home and 4 mouths to feed. And I was looking for employment. And it was really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember employers were willing to I could use my male presenting privilege at that moment as a way to start an entry level job. And then I looked at myself in the mirror and I said, I could not live one more day living unauthentically.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when I said, you know what, if somebody recommends that I'm going to have to start a new career at the bottom, then I'm just going to be me and just own it. And so I made that decision that day to show up and start interviewing as Ashely and be authentic. And so I came out as a transgender person of trans experience, female now, to the whole world. The very next day is when I became that activist, because I had to champion equality and to be able to move the conversation forward. And it really changed my life. It's what led to so many other things. Finding employment, being engaged in the community, giving back. All of those things were from that initial aha moment that I needed to become a D&I advocate.
Well, and if I could, kind of pause for a moment there, one, what a challenging situation for so many people who are of the trans experience to apply for jobs as their authentic self, because, there's so much kind of outright and unconscious bias that happens. And people sometimes are challenged whether they're quote unquote passable or not. And, so
there's a whole privilege culture just around passing.
Yeah. So, if you could take a few moments and maybe share some kind of challenges, maybe some tips, if you think of any on how to do that successfully. And maybe just a little bit about that experience, maybe some of your interview during that time. I'm sure it wasn't just the first job that you applied for. And, were you, subjected to maybe some discrimination and harassment overtly, and so forth. Do you know what I'm trying to get at?
Yeah. Oh, I got you. I got you. So honestly, this is really where I start to introduce my 10 empowering actions to leverage change. And these empowering actions are going to be the secret recipe into navigating your career development, but just applying for a job. Like, you have to build your self-confidence. You have to really know yourself in order to really be that champion. For me, changing my name was a whole entire barrier. And for those that get married, can go to a courthouse sometimes, depending on where you live and what country you live in. But it's a lot easier to change your name when you get married versus when you decide to go through gender transition. If you change your first name, it's like an additional layer of barriers. I had to pay $400 filing fee just to change my first name. And I don't know about you, but have $450 laying around when you're already battling homelessness is not something that's going to come that easy. So one of the easy tips and tricks that I shared with so many people in the community was just initialing your first name. Now you're not outing what gender you are to the potential person that you're interviewing with. And you're not misrepresenting yourself. You can share your full name after you've had a chance to fill out, in onboarding paperwork, and you can have that discussion with an employer. But just by initialing your first name, you eliminate so much unconscious bias potentially with the person that you're going to be interviewing with. So that's an easy low-hanging fruit item. But really, honestly, I started using education and inspiration were the first two things that I started doing in this job interview hunt. And I would educate the potential, my potential employer on what it was like to be trans, what it was like to be an advocate in the community. And then I started to sprinkle in inspiration. And then this is what led me to think, wow, I was going about this all wrong. Really, I needed to lead with the biggest of the 10 empowering actions that I talk about in my book, which is empower. And I really wasn't able to have amazing job hunt conversations without leading with empowerment. And what I mean by that, when I say leading with empowerment, is you have to give the data and the purpose and the driven metrics surrounding why you belong in that organization. And that can be just as simple as, I'm going to be the secret recipe to the LGBT economy for your organization, and quote the statistics, quote the NGLCC, quote the UCLA Williams Institute. All of these organizations have research studies, and each one of those is your empowering data that you need to bring.
Very, very good and very, very interesting. And, but on kind of I don't want to call it a downer side, but an unfortunate side is that you're not only having to apply for the job, you're also having to be that educator and, almost justify yourself in a level in which other people applying for the same job have the privilege of not having to do. So very, very challenging.
Yeah. And I mean, honestly, you bring up a big concept, right? That understanding privilege. And like when you have a job interview with someone, like you sometimes may have to teach them a little bit about privilege. I feel like that in like 50 or 60 years from now, we're going to look back at 2015 to hopefully maybe 2025, hopefully not much longer than that. And we're going to look back at that era as the trans civil rights movement. Like literally they're going to be taught, like a kid is going to pick up a history tablet, right? It might not be a book, but a history device. And they're going to be able to access the, history of the trans civil rights movement. They're going to look and they're going to say, this was when civil rights protections were really won for the trans community in this era. It's when we got media exposure with famous people coming out. It's when we started to be targeted by legislation, but then we were active and we were purposeful, we were driven, we were visible. All of these things are what's going to lead to that domino effect of change.
Yes, and absolutely. And it is unfortunate that in most historical events like that, it's the affected community, the affected population, are typically the ones who have to lead that charge, or I guess maybe because they're the most affected. But then obviously bringing on great community allies who see it and welcome it and embrace it and help become champions as well. So
Well, you bring up one more big point, which is the burden, right? And it is a burden to have to carry, but in my eyes, it's a necessary burden that I would rather take that on my shoulder, so that way, thinking about down the line, that the trans youth who is thinking about coming out can have an easier path, right? It's all about trying to make it easier for people in the future. And visibility, representation, all these things make that process easier. But then there's one more thing around burden to realize for your listeners, is that when I'm the banker in a branch when you walk in, because I eventually did find that job, right, in the financial services industry. And if you walk into the retail branch and I'm the banker that works in there, I'm not only, talk about burden, right? I'm not only representing Ashley Brundage. I'm representing the skill trade that I'm doing, the company that I'm doing, right? And that I'm working for. But then I'm also representing the LGBTQ plus community, and then now the trans community. And that's a huge burden to have to lift on to a person. And that's why so many people in the trans community are like, they don't want to come, like they don't want to come out. They don't want to they want to transition and then be done with it, because that burden that we're talking about here is a lot of extra weight to put on someone. My actions shouldn't need to be representative of an entire community, but the moment I messed up, right? The moment I make a mistake or lash out on someone, that we live in this world, right, where everybody's watching and everybody's looking. And then one moment that happens, I'm not going to think about what's going to be the headline of that article. It's not going to say, banker or da da da. It's going to say trans person does this. And we have to really know that that's the world that we're living in this civil rights movement era. We have to know that our actions are going to be held accountable in some way.
Yes, and you're right. That is a heavy burden, and it's unfortunate. And I'm so glad to have this dialogue, and have had several people of trans experience on, and a few episodes to come out soon. And that's a fairly common thread, and it's of course I'm doing interviews with people who are striving to make change, so maybe I'm hearing more than others, but I look forward to the day that like I'm sure you and why you do it, when what you do is, and why you do it, is so that the future folks can just transition and don't have to take on that. I hate to call it political, but there are political aspects to it, but the cultural, the weight of the cultural world and the weight of the political side of things too, because of fighting for rights and and dignity and so forth.
Yeah.
So
but not all of it is bad, right? Because honestly, human nature is built on curiosity. Like, we always want to understand something that we don't know a lot about. And it's that quest for knowledge that can sometimes get us in trouble in this unconscious bias world, right? In the world of really trying to, right, first we should check ourselves and do a privilege check. It's like, instead of doing a mic check, let's do a privilege check, because that might be a good way to start your day off. But yeah, that quest for knowledge, it's like, we want to prove the world's not flat. We want to We want to research every species on Earth. We want to just prove that we can get to space, prove that we can get to the moon, prove that we can get to Mars. It's like all of these things that we just have to keep proving ourselves as humans. And that falls into that whole quest for knowledge. And we really, as humans, don't understand the trans experience. So that's why that right now that burden falls so much on the community to really be able to provide that information. And it can't always be bad. I mean, sometimes it is what it is, right?
Yes. And I'll just share that it's been even enlightening for myself, having, these conversations, because even, I'm a cisgender male, gay, but I've, until really I've started doing these interviews, I've not known a transgender person well. I've met people out and about and so forth at a bar, having a cocktail, but, really develop friendships and develop a real dialogue. And I have learned so much and have grown to a much greater level of awareness, although I certainly don't claim to know everything, and a much greater level of appreciation. I know the challenges that I faced growing up in a fairly right-wing environment, and still issues with my dad today over just who I am. And so I really respect the trans community for the level of authenticity and the challenges that people of trans experience go through, that are even though I've had difficulties in, family relationships and so forth, but if I were to go for a job interview, as just taking that basic thing of needing, to put food on the table and a roof over the head and pay for electricity and internet access and everything else, it's given me a greater level of understanding and appreciation for the difficulties of the trans community. So how did, and you work now, as you mentioned, you grew into a role as a diversity and inclusion director, or whatever the appropriate title is, in organizations have different ones. And I know you're in financial, so everybody and their brother is a vice president.
Right. We give those away like candy, right?
Yeah, you're the vice president of janitorial services. But it is. Most of my clients in the past were financial institutions, so I say that with endearment. But you've taken that experience early and you have built a career in it. Can you share a little bit about how that kind of came to be, from being a bank teller to
from bank teller to VP of a diversity and inclusion program at a major financial services organization in less than 5 years.
Wow.
So I used like I mentioned in that job interview discussion we had a few moments ago, how I used education and inspiration, but ultimately it was the empowerment and how I needed to lead with empowerment to get past those hurdles to find employment. Those 3 empowering actions helped get a framework for how I was able to build my career so quickly. But it was the other 7 empowering actions that I've been talking about, these 10 empowering actions to leverage change, that really helped lead me in from a part-time bank teller to being the VP of diversity and inclusion. I did not go to college, so I took a road less traveled in this space. So I really had to show the metrics of all the engagements that I was doing to really be able to build that position and role. It was a role that I advocated to get created for me, based on all of leveraging partnerships. Like, you have to have mentors, you have to have access to sponsors, you have to have so many influential moments to have this come to fruition. And that's really, that whole process is kind of what I did I outlined that process in my book that's coming out. And there's a 4-step process to self-empowerment that I laid out and how I did that. and it's like a guiding principle in essence.
Wonderful.
And I can go into that if you want me to share that.
Oh, yes, please.
4-step process of self-empowerment. So the 4-step process of self-empowerment is step 1, you have to know yourself, right? And I know it's like jokingly, we like RuPaul, everyone knows RuPaul says, right? How the hell are you going to help anybody else if you can't help yourself first, right?
Absolutely. I use that quote often.
So really, you have to know yourself. So knowing yourself is step 1 of my empowering differences process. And then knowing others is step 2, because you need to start knowing your community. That's why I had that empowerment data that I was talking about and why that's so important. So you need to know the metrics around your diversity, your community. You need to know where you belong, right? I mean, to your point, right? All of that is going to help you in that mission of knowing others, and that's networking. That's like joining a community like OutBüro is a perfect opportunity to really get the chance to know others. Take the time and message 10 people every day on OutBüro, and then that gives you the chance to build the connection to know others. That's literally what I was doing. I was building those relationships in that knowing others category. And then step 3 is then developing your strategy. Now that you know yourself, you know people, you need to really trial and error. This is where you'll start to build that strategy and your access to mentors and sponsors. And then the last step, my favorite, is those 10 empowering actions. And then how you use them to really leverage change will be the ultimate domino that gets you to that career mission that you want.
Oh, awesome. And, this one of the having a mentor, and sometimes people are like, well, what do you mean by that? How do I go about that? And that's one of the reasons why on OutBüro, on the professional profile there, I added the ability for people to indicate that they're open to being a mentor and what areas of expertise that they are open to being a mentor on. And then if someone is looking, so that people can actually use the site to specifically search for mentors and or mentees, and I think it's really important in all communities, but especially in the LGBT community. If you're out there and you've have a successful career, you've had a successful business or something, paying it back, giving some time. Maybe it's just 2 hours a month of doing a phone call or a Zoom call with a young, and I say younger, I just mean in the profession. I mean, you could even be a brand new entrepreneur at the age of 50, and you still might at the age of 50 need some mentorship, someone to bounce ideas off of and so forth. So I say young, but I don't just mean an age, young in whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And, I think that's really critical. So I applaud you for recognizing that and for the mentors that you have had within your company, that really speaks well to a great environment.
Well, and don't forget that mentorship is a two-way street. It's not just you providing information to someone else. They actually should be also in providing information to you. And if you're not getting something out of a mentoring opportunity on both angles, then it's not being done right. And you need to reclassify, look at how you're structuring that and build a more strategic action plan. I love using SMART mentorship. And I think that SMART, obviously the acronym, right? Specific, measurable, actionable, time related, right? And results. right? So building that into how you plan mentorship is going to really change the way that you think about it. That's why mentor is one of those 10 empowering actions, because it was instrumentally key in my career development.
Oh, very, very good. And I like that SMART acronym. You're right. It does. It's not just a one-way street. It is not just a, time to talk about the weather. So, yeah. And as entrepreneurs, and well, in all careers, but I like to use the example of entrepreneurs because I think it's just so much, maybe a little bit more visible, because like if you're in a job, your job has very clear, and especially in a large organization, very clear role and what you can do. But, as an entrepreneur, especially if you're a small business, you're so often having to wear so many hats from, marketing and possibly a little bit of legal and all of this. I like to use the example, Susie, the cosmetic dentist, when she graduated from dentistry school, she wasn't taught to do marketing, wasn't taught to do business administration and human resources and, legal and everything else. She was taught to make a smile beautiful.
It could
right?
be overwhelming.
Yes, it can be.
To be the CEO, the chief marketing officer, the chief information officer,
all at
chief
once.
Human resources officer.
Yes.
Daunting, actually, is probably the better word, potentially.
I can attest to that. It can be daunting. So definitely there's a strong need for mentorship in the entrepreneur space, but I definitely also see it within the career space as well. Working for someone else. And one of the fellas I had on not long ago, named Stan Kimmer, he's the vice president of training at the National Diversity Council. Yes. Well, and he was talking about his career at IBM. So I'll actually put a bookmark up here to that interview, because he used mentoring and to literally jump between totally different departments within over his 30-some year career at IBM, and learn new skills and became part of the diversity and inclusion department at IBM. And so again, I'll link to that here for folks to, when you're done with this episode, go check that out as well. So what was then kind of like the process of, the spark for your book? And, that's a huge feat in itself. I speak to numerous authors, and everyone kind of has their own journey and their own process. So I'd love for you to talk about kind of why you felt it was something you wanted or needed to do. And then let's kind of talk about your process in writing it.
Yeah, so I actually kind of reverse engineered this process. What I see oftentimes, most public speakers and trainers typically have a book and then they speak on the book, and I went about it all wrong. I wish that I had built the book first and then been building my speaking business from the book, but I reverse engineered this, so be it. And which was all my own way of making this happen. So that was one kind of mistake, but so be it. And it just led to how I came to this point. And I think it maybe would have been a different book had I written it first. And honestly, when I was growing in my career as a banker, I was winning sales awards left and right. I was actually in the top 3 revenue producing employees in the whole company out of 50,000 employees. So I had an amazing story on that own right. And that's where I was kind of writing the book in that lane around my story of overcoming homelessness and rising up to be a sales champion. And while I thought that was going to have mass market appeal, I realized that it was more about a transgender journey, which is not a bad book to write, but I feel like that book has been written by numerous trans advocates. And I didn't want to write another trans novel about their experience. I don't want to take away from any of my friends who have written a trans novel, but I feel like that wasn't what I was built for. That wasn't what my purpose was going to be. And so then I retooled what I had, in essence, kind of as my introduction and how I was like leading to empowerment. And that's actually one of the chapters in my book, is leading to empowerment. And it was like, I repurposed that entire book into really be 1 or 2 chapters in my current book. And then that's when I was like, okay, after finding the position and fighting hard and advocating and getting access to the mentors and sponsors I needed to get the position created for diversity and inclusion, that was, oh my goodness, now that I've come from part-time bank teller to VP diversity and inclusion in less than 5 years, I need to communicate how I was able to do that and communicate that clearly. And so then that's when I started really working on that. 2016 is when I moved into the D&I office, and then it took me a little while to get my feet wet, right? Because I didn't want to take away time from really learning my job function and producing results, because you have to deliver on the results. If you don't deliver on results, what you say will not matter in an organization. And so 2018 is when I really started saying, okay, I'm ready. And I built a map. And so really from 2018 through 2019 is when I basically kind of, that year, I really developed everything and built the book out. And my process was actually kind of fun. I used the share drive for the documents, and I had a document for each chapter, and I would use the voice dictate button, to dictate to voice to text to really fill out as much as my thoughts. And then I hired a developmental editor who's another entrepreneur in the LGBTQ world. And she helped me kind of put all this into the framing for how I wanted to actually have it structured in the book. And that was really impactful in bringing it to life. And then I actually finished the book at the beginning of 2020, and and then 2020 happened, right? And I had to take a quick peek at some of the chapters, especially intersectionality and privilege, because those I wanted to make sure they landed well, given the murder of George Floyd and so many other people of color. And I knew that I could not write a book on the overarching concept of diversity and inclusion and have it just be by a white person. So I brought in some intersectional diverse friends of mine to give their perspective on race, ethnicity, language access, accessibility, disability inclusion. My book actually encompasses a lot of extreme diverse voices that really speak to how these 10 empowering actions can be used to really leverage change.
Awesome. Well, one, again, having an ex who wrote a novel but didn't take it anywhere, and having several friends who are authors, I know the firsthand the journey, and it's difficult. So I can appreciate you having that, strategic editor to come in and help you find hone everything. Because gosh, even if I'm just writing, I have 180 articles on OutBüro.com, and just for me to write, a 2 or 3 page article, it's a process. And sometimes when you're even in just that kind of a short piece, sometimes it really helps having another person review it, because sometimes the content so well, and you might think you're covering it thoroughly, but someone who doesn't know the topic might read it and have questions and insights to help you convey that message more thoroughly for a general audience. So I can totally appreciate that. And I really like that you did bring in other people to share their experiences and make the book richer from those different perspectives.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Yeah.
Awesome. And so you are, again, for folks listening to this at some point in the future, doing these interviews is like me living forever.
Yes, we'll live on in fame or infamy, depending on whichever way that someone wants to lens it, right?
Yeah, exactly. But but you are, officially doing your book launch later today. And as I shared with you before we started recording, I've seen lots of people that I know pretty well promoting your book and sharing it. That's exciting.
Yeah, including GLAAD. GLAAD is a partner in my book launch, which is kind of exciting, right?
Wow.
I have a special announcement for your listeners. If you're thinking about purchasing my book, 10% of the proceeds from the sale of my book is actually going back to GLAAD, because community and fundraising and social entrepreneurship is so important to me, and I couldn't produce a book and then not have an empowering piece to it.
Wow.
So
Awesome.
That's exciting to announce that for your listeners.
Awesome. And so how will this be available? How will people find your book, and where can they purchase it?
So they can purchase my book directly on my website if they want me to do a fun signed personalization copy. In this virtual world, it's like you can't necessarily attend a book signing. So if you'd like me to sign your book, if you go to my website at empoweringdifferences.com, that's where you'll be able to grab your copy of the book. But if you are listening from somewhere outside the US, you can totally still purchase my book on Amazon, because they have the market cornered in so many ways.
Awesome.
Amazon, it's widely available on Amazon, bookwire.com, and it's going to be added to a bunch more sites in the next coming weeks, including the Audible version is launching in January. So,
very nice.
So that'll be exciting.
Are you doing the narration, or?
I did the narration, actually.
Awesome.
So you get to hear it in my voice, which it was very triggering. I do have to say that. And this is the thing that the trans community faces often, is this whole voice thing, and especially in this digital world where oftentimes you could probably listening to me potentially on a podcast right now, and it can be very triggering for trans individuals to be sharing their voice openly. And that's what leads to many of them not wanting to be so vocal in many ways. I had to take my own advice and listen to my 10 empowering actions to leverage change to get over myself and my own issue around the triggering of hearing my own voice. And I've worked with some voice coaches, and I've done the things that I can do, and I do some exercises around trying to feminize my voice, but it is what it is, and I just have to own it, and I have to be empowering. And what message would it have sent if I wrote a book about self-empowerment and then I didn't get over myself to record the Audible for my own book? Like, that would have sent the wrong message. So I had to get over it, and it was actually really fun to be able to do that and be in the studio and monitor the decibel levels.
Yes. Well, and for those that don't know, that is it's a skill. And I actually have gone through 8 months of voiceover training and back several years ago, and on a few commercials. You can actually find my demo reels on SoundCloud if you search my name. And that was, it's different because, you know, when you're only speaking and you don't have the great video, and this recording will not only be on the YouTube, it'll also be on 14 podcasting apps. And as well, here in January, all of my episodes will be on a new LGBTQ on-demand TV network called Happy TV at gethappy.tv, and that's happy with an I. And it was very different because, how to say this, you know, my growing up, my father was always like, stop talking so much with your hands. You know, I'm big with my hands. I'm big with expression and like that. And I you know, I would just say, I'm not the butchest guy. And so sometimes it would be a little hard for me at first to, you know, hear myself and go, oh my God, I sound so gay.
Oh my gosh.
But you know, going through that voiceover training that I did with a really well-renowned voiceover artist, it was very interesting because sometimes I would have people, you know, listen to, you know, my commercials and listen to my demo reels and everything and go, oh my God, is that you? I'm like, yeah, that's me. It's just I'm controlling my intonation and your breath, and I'm sure with your book reading you had to learn how to speak clearly and articulate and breath control and mic, you know, placement
And
pace. Yes,
enunciation.
yes, correct.
Wow, it's a lot of work.
it is. And so but you're right, how empowering and you know, authenticity of, you know, of narrating your own book. And so, and I think that's a great message for everyone, you know, to hear. So hopefully they'll also listen to you on your narration. Is that on audible.com, did you say?
Yeah, so it's in final review through the exchange. It'll be on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes.
Oh, wonderful.
In January. So right. I'm sure you'll be listening by the time you're listening, right?
Yes, by the time you're listening to this. Well, so cool. Well, if you don't mind, I do see you've had your family portrait there. So how has all of this, you know, with sharing whatever you're comfortable with, you know, how has all of this kind of, you know, how's your family taking it? I'm sure they're very supportive, but.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. In fact, I often refer to them as Ashley's allies because, you know, and really, so many times the three of them have really saved my life, like for real, saved my life. And there's a reason, right? 42% suicide or attempt rate for the trans community is real because oftentimes they don't have those allies, or they're shunned, or they're sent away. I was embraced 11 years ago when I 11 years ago when I came out and stopped living a double life. Like that was killing me. And then I was embraced, and it's what led to my empowerment. It's what led to me fighting those employers. And it's why I had that superpower ability, was because I was being fueled by my allies who were there for me. And Whitney, Bryson, Blake have just been such champions for me and supported me. And that's really why I try to do so much in the community to support so many LGBT organizations, locally, nationally, and globally, because it's so important to give back, since I was the beneficiary of so much allyship.
Oh, that's awesome. And you know, you have your actual family, and of course, so many in the LGBT community being disenfranchised from their, you know, birth family, have to create that family. And
yeah,
those can be just as strong, if not stronger bonds.
Yeah.
So
I belong to a sorority of transgender women, a global sorority of transgender women.
I've never heard of this. Very interesting.
It's called VC International, and we bring together a fellowship, and it's women across all levels of the trans community. We've had more than 800 lifetime members, and we have like almost 250 active members in the sorority. Usually we gather at the international trans conferences. So like sometimes you may see us at Sparkle in the UK, or you'll see us at the Keystone Conference in Pennsylvania, which is one of the bigger ones, or Las Vegas TG Rocktober. There's a lot of trans cons like that happen across the world. And so we usually make our visibility known throughout those events. It's pretty cool.
I didn't even know of those. Again, that's what I love about doing these conversations is every one I learn something new.
And honestly, from the sales cycle, like when I used to be a salesperson, now I just sell inclusion, but there's that. But when I was selling products and services and goods, like I would set up shop at these transgender conferences across the nation, and I would mine the clients like for the entire year at one weekend.
Wow. Yeah, 1 weekend of leads and then mine those clients throughout the year.
Yeah, it would be like done, and I would be able to have a constant pipeline of business to mine, which is, that's how you create change. You have to seek out your community, and that could be applied for any diversity. And that's really the foundational concept in my book, is really about utilizing these principles that I talk about every day in ways that will help you grow your career. And if you're a salesperson, you have to read my book. Like there's no doubt about it. And I wrote it with you in mind.
Oh, well, and everyone is a salesperson, folks. Everyone.
Exactly.
Because, no matter what your job is, you are always selling. And even if that's just negotiating with your boyfriend or girlfriend or significant other what you want to do this weekend, that's selling. You're trying to pitch your idea, the benefits of it, and all of that. So
well, and if you do HR for an organization, right, the organization that you work for ultimately sells something. So guess what? You still work in sales because you work for that organization. So you need to rethink your strategy, and you need to be very purposeful in how you position your organization and the brand that you represent.
Well, absolutely. And as I, like to say, I mean, and you just brought it up, but I'm going to restate it in my way. In human resources, there's for folks out there, there's the concept of employer branding, in order to attract the types of talent that your organization desires. And so that HR department is not just quote unquote recruiting, it's actually promoting and branding, just like you were to see a Coca-Cola commercial or McDonald's commercials, right? That it's branding, but from an HR perspective. And oh, by the way, OutBüro.com is an employer branding platform. So, ding, for targeting the LGBT inclusive community. Well, I know we are almost up.
Sign up today, right?
Sign up today. Contact me if you are an employer and would like to explore the employer branding benefits of OutBüro. I'm looking for our early adopters. So would love
that. Because your brand belongs there, honestly.
Yeah. And I won't go into a whole sales pitch here, and I know we're coming up on time and you are in the middle of your workday. Plus you have your fantastic book launch later today. And I'm sure you want to get in the zone, for that. So is there any, kind of last thoughts or words before we say goodbye?
Yeah, I just wanted to, thank you for the time, and I'll leave you with this. The 10th of the 10, so the 10 empowering actions and the way that I've structured them in the book, you'll notice they're in a specific order. The reason is because based on your diversity, there's actually a specific order for the 10 empowering actions that I've identified through consulting with those diverse communities. So for me and for my community, the way the order is presented was the most powerful for my community. But you'll find as you read the book that the order in which you use the 10 empowering actions will serve you differently based on your diversity, which is kind of neat. So I'm excited to hear back around how you structure the use of these 10 empowering actions and how you put them all together.
Very, very cool. Well, I would love to read it. It would be empowering for me. Well, I so much appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy time period right now and talking about your journey. And it's very inspirational seeing what you have accomplished and that you're giving back to not only the LGBT community, but the wider community at large. So awesome.
Thanks so much, Dennis. This was great.
Well, absolutely, Ashley. And thank you, everyone, for staying tuned here to the end of this episode. And reward yourself by smashing that subscribe button right here on YouTube and clicking that notified bell. That'll ensure that when new episodes come out while you're surfing YouTube, you'll get that red notification to be aware. Be sure you also check us out so that on 14 different podcasting apps, including Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and about 10 others, so that you can listen to OutBüro Voices on the go. All righty. Thank you so much, and you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.